Direct from 7 News headquarters, the latest on the coronavirus outbreak with Michael Usher and Melissa Doyle.
Good evening and welcome. Over the next hour, we'll be keeping you right across all of the fast-moving developments.
Guiding you through with the help of Australia's leaders in their fields, from healthcare to education and employment.
Tonight, we'll be joined by informed medical minds to address your fears, weigh in on symptoms, the testing rates and extreme new measures flattening the curve overseas. We'll have advice for parents from 2 of Australia's experienced educators, how to make sure your kids do not fall behind. Job losses across the board, but we'll tell you why there is some hope tonight. The boss of Centrelink joins us live. We'll also cross to an Italian doctor on the front lines in the worst affected region. But first, let's check on the global and local infection rates as they stand right now. Let's go to Mel with what you need to know tonight.
Well, this is the warning from health officials. The pandemic is accelerating and the numbers show just how rapidly. From the first reported cases in Wuhan, it took 67 days to reach 100,000. It took 11 days for the second 100,000 and just 4 days after that, we had passed 300,000 globally. Tonight, that number is over 334,000 from almost every country in the world, with more than 14,000 dead. For Australia, that trend is just as worrying. From the first confirmed cases, it took 45 days to pass 100. We are now 14 days on from that, and the national tally stands at 2,005 cases. And having a look at the curve, this is how Australia is tracking. So if we compare that with some other countries, you can see there's been a bit of an uptick. So this is also worth noting, particularly for those younger people that may think they are immune. The spread of cases across the age groups and genders, male and female, fairly even, but so too is the span over ages. Just as many cases in their 20s and 30s as you can see there in their 50s and 60s, Michael.
Thank you for that. Now, on Monday, everyday life in Australia drastically changed as the Prime Minister announced a raft of staged 1 restrictions. It's looking increasingly likely we're now heading towards more strict lockdown measures. The Health Minister, Greg Hunt, hinted at these when speaking about tonight's National Cabinet meeting in Canberra. Have a listen.
They are then looking at greater social distancing measures. I don't want to preempt that because that's a discussion and a decision, firstly, where the medical experts are looking at the optimal stages, and secondly, where our national leaders will collectively provide that unified decision.
Well, the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, speaking. Let's now take a look at what we can expect from the next phase of lockdowns. I'm joined by Dr John Doyle, the CEO of the Grattan Institute and one of Australia's leading public policy thinkers. John, thank you so much for joining the latest this evening. Now, stage 1, we saw most venues close, restaurants, cafes restricted to takeaway only, as we know. In your view, what does stage 2 look like?
Well, that depends how far governments are prepared to go. But my suspicion is that sooner or later we're going to wind up looking pretty much like Italy, like France, like the UK, like indeed a lot of China did for a while, in which you essentially say the only people who go to work are those who are working in essential services. So that's roughly speaking supermarkets, grocers, petrol stations, and the people who lie in the chain behind them. So ultimately the farmers, the people who drive the trucks to get the produce to the packages, and then the people who get it to supermarkets. Otherwise, you say to people, please stay in your home. And certainly what we've seen overseas is police really enforcing that, as well as a lot of social pressure to enforce that. So essentially the only people that you wind up coming into contact are the people in your own family, in your own home. And when you go to the supermarket for essential supplies, and then obviously the doctor or the health worker if you have some kind of health problem. Yeah. That's where other countries have wound up, because the real game here, we would suggest that the optimal game is one in which we see infection rates fall below 1. So each person infects less than one other person. And as soon as you get to that point, then you're in a world in which the total number of infected people starts to fall pretty quickly, in exactly the same way that it rises really dramatically if you don't have it under control.
I'm being told right now, John, in fact, the Prime Minister is very likely to speak at 9 o'clock tonight, which we'll take live, obviously, which means he has more announcements out of that Cabinet meeting. The restrictions, they're being reviewed in very short spaces here. How often do you think they'll be reviewed going forward?
Well, I would expect that they will be continued to be reviewed essentially with each national cabinet. At the moment, in practice, they've wound up being 3 times a week, so that's kind of more or less every second day. I would imagine that they will continue to review them. Our view is that the faster we move to that kind of lockdown, which we think we are going to get to anyway, the fewer cases we will have, and therefore the faster we can come out the far side. It's worth noting that essentially pretty much every democracy in the world, and indeed every non-democracy other than Iran, has wound up instituting these kind of things as soon as the virus takes hold. And of course, the earlier you put them in place, the earlier you're going to be in a position to release them.
And is this about getting towards the flattening of the curve? Could you explain that?
Well, I think there are 2 fundamental strategies here. One is to flatten the curve, so you're just trying to slow the number of cases, but you accept that the virus is essentially going to go through the entire population. That was certainly the strategy of the UK government up until a couple of days ago. What they realised was that, firstly, public opinion was never going to stand for that, and they've now gone to more or less a complete lockdown such as the one I've just described. And secondly, although it looks like the short-run economic cost of moving to that sort of lockdown is very high, and obviously the infringement on civil liberties is very high, the long-term cost is much lower because you give businesses a plausible reason to believe that will only be in place for 2 to 3 months rather than an ongoing epidemic that could be with us for a much longer period than that, and therefore there's a lot more businesses that say we can't continue.
All right, we'll know all this in about 2 hours too when the PM speaks, and we'll take that live, as I said. Really good insight there, Dr. John Daly. Thank you for that. Mel.
Well, right now, the National Cabinet, the Prime Minister and State and Territory leaders are meeting to discuss this next step. So let's go inside COVID HQ, cross to political editor Mark Riley in Parliament House. And Mark, what do we know? Are we looking at more severe lockdown measures?
Good evening, Mel. I think we are. I think we'll look at a stage 2 announcement tonight by the sounds of things, and that may be a step towards what John Daly was talking about there. Not the total lockdown, but something between what we have now and that situation. So what they're looking at is a uniformity of measures across the state. So at the moment we have some states locking down their borders and other states not, so there'll be discussion about that. Social distancing, as you heard Greg Hunt, the Health Minister, refer earlier in the program, will be reviewed. So perhaps there'll be tighter regulations on, or tighter rules and tighter recommendations on social distancing. Also, the states have undertaken to come back to this meeting with some proposals on rent assistance and rent relief for people who are going to be in financial stress. And there are a lot of those people. We see them lined up outside of Centrelink today. So they're the 3 major measures I expect, but probably a step towards total lockdown. I don't think we're getting there yet, Mel.
Yeah, we're going to discuss those Centrelink images later. Absolutely heartbreaking. But you use the word uniformity in there. I mean, that seems so far removed from what we've seen the last few days. How hard is it for the PM to keep consensus between the states?
Really difficult, Mel, but essential, and that's the primary purpose for Scott Morrison as he runs these meetings, because people want a united voice. The enemy of the good here is misinformation and confusion, and there has been plenty of that. Different messages coming from the states on the weekend caused a lot of confusion, and yesterday, and what the Prime Minister is trying to do is get everybody on the same page. So he's trying to hold together that consensus, and of course every state has a different idea and perhaps different pressures that are localised, greater rates of infection, greater pressures on individual health systems. So they might be looking for different things, but the real important primary objective for Scott Morrison is to get everybody pointed in the same direction, having a national approach, Mel.
I know everything is moving, changing very fast, but did we not anticipate the number of people that would be going to Centrelink and asking for assistance? There's been so much frustration, hasn't there, with online services. What's your assessment on how the government's handling it?
I think they botched it. I mean, it's pretty obvious, the gross indignity for those poor people standing for 4 and 5 hours in lines, serpentine queues, snaking around their local areas, waiting to see somebody about signing on to Centrelink is just appalling. It really is. And when you think about it, OK, the government says reasonably enough, even they were shocked by the number of people who were tipped out of their jobs. But don't forget, it was a decision and an announcement by the Prime Minister and the Premiers and the Territory leaders to close a lot of these businesses effectively. Those first raft of restrictions put cafes and restaurants and small business people out of work. So they tip the people on the street. If you're going to do that, you have to have the systems in place to help the people. So, you can have some sympathy towards the government, but, I've learnt in my 27 years here to reserve my sympathy for people who deserve it, and governments don't in these situations. They should have been better prepared.
Yeah, do the numbers, anticipate. Thank you. As you said, PM will be speaking at 9 o'clock tonight, so we'll find out the next steps. Yeah, thanks, Mark, very much.
Well, Australia's recorded its 8th coronavirus death. The latest victim, a passenger from the cruise ship, which was allowed to disembark in Sydney last week. Let's bring in our reporter, Evan Batten, now. Evan, good evening to you. This is just a chronic situation. What more do we know about this woman?
Oh, good evening, Michael. Yeah, terribly sad this. She's aged in her 70s. She was on this Ruby Princess cruise ship to New Zealand, and she started coming down with symptoms during the cruise. One of 3 people to be tested before she got off here in Sydney last Thursday, taken straight to hospital where, despite the best care of doctors and medical teams, 5 days later, sadly this morning, she died. 2,700 people got off this Ruby Princess cruise without being tested. They were able to travel around the state, around the country and around the world.
Yeah, that's right, because another passenger, Alyssa McCafferty, her name is, flew to England, we've learned, without checks after disembarking that cruise. Now, she has since developed coronavirus symptoms. Have a look at what she had to say today.
I felt like I'd done a 2-round session with Jean-Claude Van Damme and not been able to move. Fatigue. I'm sleeping so much, but then I'll have a coughing fit and it'll wake me up for another couple of hours.
Yeah, Evan, so many people infected from that ship now, and another cruise ship has been turned away, is that right?
That's right, yeah. The Carnival Spirit was due in this afternoon. One of 8 we're expecting here in the coming days. It was turned around. It's got 400 crew on board. One of them has symptoms of coronavirus, and they won't let it dock here now until those test results are in. Michael?
All right, Evan Batten in the harbour there. Thank you.
Now, this was the scene at the border between South Australia and Western Australia this afternoon. Cars queued back several kilometres. They're travellers attempting to enter Western Australia before strict coronavirus border protections came into place. So anyone entering tonight now faces a 2-week self-isolation. And have a look, midnight tomorrow, Queensland's borders will shut for the first time in more than a century. Cars and people will be stopped by police at checkpoints, and everyone flying in will need to prove they are a Queensland resident.
We do not want people coming to Queensland to have a holiday break. This is not holiday break season. This is the season to stay at home with your family.
Now, I want to show you some confronting pictures. Bruised and chafed, these are the exhausted faces of medical staff in Europe who are working for hours on end, wearing ill-fitting masks and equipment. Never have these doctors and nurses deserved our respect more than now. Some 15,000 kilometres away in Italy, the small medieval town of Bergamo near Milan is now the epicentre of the world's health crisis. Now, earlier this week, a news crew filmed these stark pictures in one of many overwhelmed hospitals in the country.
This isn't a ward, this is a waiting room. Wherever you go, people are on gurneys, in corridors, in meeting rooms, they're everywhere. Bergamo wanted us to see this to show what a catastrophic emergency nobody has experienced before looks like. Here they're calling it the apocalypse. And this is what it looks like.
I'm joined by Dr. Lorenzo D'Antiga, who's a medical director at that very hospital. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Can I ask you first, how quickly did things escalate in your hospital?
That was really sudden. It was less than a month ago when very suddenly there was the outbreak in northern Italy, and actually it was in the Lombardy region where is my hospital. And things really escalated so quickly that so far there have been a total of 60,000 infected patients in the country. And 20,000 in my region.
20,000 in your region. How have you coped with that?
Actually, we are not coping with that. Hundreds of patients coming all together to the hospital, and that really caused a crash in our system.
It's like an approaching storm. Is that how you likened it? And was it a matter of days before the hospital started filling?
Yes. The worst thing is that you are watching this escalating and becoming, more and more dramatic, but you don't realize until it is actually a bit too late.
What are some of the most serious challenges that your hospital has faced?
Many patients come into the accident and emergency department. The hospital is 1,000 beds hospital, and now 500 beds are occupied by COVID patients. So many wards have been replaced, the neurology ward, the internal medicine ward. So everything has changed, turned really upside down. We're all working on COVID patients. For instance, I'm in charge of the pediatric department. I'm a pediatrician, but I'm doing shifts on adult patients.
And do you have a simple explanation as to why the infection and the death rate has been so severe in Italy? We're all looking at it and wondering.
One reason is that we had a big outbreak. Something happened in a nearby hospital, a small hospital. Probably the first few cases were not recognized. And in an hospital, it is a perfect environment to have a big diffusion.
As a country, we're trying now to really crack down, stay indoors. There was early criticism that we didn't do enough, but certainly a lot is being done now. Possibly more could be done. Do you have a simple message to our decision makers and our population?
The first message is it is very important to lock in and stay at home. If we don't slow the transmission of this virus, a lot of people will get infected and will need intensive support at once. And unfortunately, we will not have the resources, and you will not have the resources. In the hospital, around 10% of the infected persons are healthcare professionals. So it is very important to wear the personal protection equipment, be very careful. Actually, 30 doctors died so far. And this is a major problem. In the hospital, everybody should get a swab. Should get tested for the virus so that everybody that got infected can be isolated. This is really paramount. We have not done that very properly, and many got infected.
That's a very important message. Look, to all of your patients and your medical staff who are suffering as well and doing extraordinary work, we really thank you for those clear messages. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Just frightening numbers, aren't they? Now, still to come, your questions answered live tonight by experienced doctors and mental health professionals.
Educators share their advice for what to do with your kids' schooling and weigh in on the mixed messages when it comes to closures.
From Bluetooth to drones, a look at the extreme new technology being used to enforce self-isolation.
And as unemployment skyrockets across the country, we get answers for you direct from the boss of Centrelink. That's all coming up next here on The Latest from 7 News. As the pandemic continues to spread, so does stress and anxiety among so many Australians. We know that. So how can we all do the right thing while maintaining our mental health?
Well, let's bring in our expert panel. Chair of Clinical Psychology at the University of Melbourne, Professor Kim Felmingham, and General Practitioner Dr. Sam Hay. Thank you both for your time. Kim, as Michael just said, stress, anxiety, I feel like there's so much fear around. What should we be doing to maintain our mental health at this time?
Yeah, look, it's vital. So many people are feeling anxious and it's perfectly normal and natural to do so. So don't ignore that. Reach out to people, talk to people supportive. Exercise, yoga, meditation are all really vital. Keeping regular eating, healthy eating, sleeping. Don't hit the booze. That's not going to help you too much, even though it's tempting. So just looking after your mental health and acknowledging these are hard times for everybody. This has really hit us very suddenly.
Yeah, it is. Sam, let me ask you, social distancing and the practice of it, I think we're all getting pretty good at it. There's been enough education about it in the past few days. How important is it to do social distancing sensibly?
Look, Michael, I'm not sure I do agree with you. Unfortunately, I think most Aussies out there are getting rather cavalier and rather selfish. And I think that's because most Aussies are thinking about this as, what can I do to distance myself to stop me getting the infection? I'd like to see a lot more Aussies thinking about, think of yourself as you've got the infection and you're trying your damnedest not to give it to other people. And that is going to make a massive difference to halt this in its tracks. People have just got to play by the rules.
Kim, what do you do? Like, so you're at home, you're cooped up in a house, you're all isolated, whether it be a family or a couple or roommates, you're stuck in isolation. What's some advice there on just managing and trying to stay calm?
Yeah. So, look, I think this is a unique situation for us, but keep a regular routine. Work together to form a collaborative routine. Get the kids, your partner involved, your housemates. Work it out together. Really importantly, in that routine, have a balance. So have some together time, but have some alone time. Create retreat spaces if your accommodation allows it. Have some solitary time. Balance exercise, work, some fun times, and also some relaxation and down times. But also stay connected. So use social media, but don't get on all the discussion boards with the armchair epidemiologists and all the sensationalism. So get your news sources from reputable places, but go to supportive social media. You know, make video links with people you normally see. Play some online games, have an online book club. Those kind of activities are really vital. And ringing people, especially the elderly or high-risk people or people in self-isolation.
Sam, that's all good advice. I'm just concerned now about the amount of Australians that are going to be so financially stressed and, are really anxious about a lot of things, losing jobs. If they're trying to self-medicate, you've got to be really careful about this if you're trying to diagnose yourself as well. When should you consult a doctor?
Look, this self-medication is becoming a bit of an issue around the world. We've seen some reports in the last week about some drugs out there that are showing promise, but at the moment that's all they're doing, showing promise. So we really don't want people in the community just going and grabbing these drugs and taking them, because we're not in the right context. The other thing is there's been some concern about ibuprofen and whether that might increase people's risks, but in the last day or so that's been squashed. But maybe stick to paracetamol in the first instance if you're dealing with aches and pains and fevers. And the other big self-medication to keep away from is too much alcohol. When we get a bit bored and a bit stressed, we tend to drink more. I'm really hoping that people can just curb that back a bit. Getting to the doctor, it's a good idea to get in touch with your doctor at the moment to find out what sort of services they're offering. A lot of GPs, like my practice, we've transitioned to telehealth. So it's a different style of medicine. We're going to be talking to you over the phone rather than seeing you face to face. So understand what's out there so that you know what to do if you do get sick.
Kim, we saw those Centrelink lines. A lot of people are losing their jobs. What is your advice to them to look after their mental health? And also, what would you say for others to say to them as well? Because often that's a really tricky thing, isn't it? What do you say to somebody that's going through that?
Absolutely. I think the first thing is no one blame anyone here. It's no one's fault. We can't judge ourselves or others for what's happening. The rug's been pulled out of so many people, and no one's got a safety net. This safety net, we're seeing there's real holes in that. I think my advice would be, seek help if you need it. Was saying about telehealth for GPs. We are now having telehealth counselling for psychologists as well, which is available. So I think that's a really important resource, as is online mental health chat forums. I think seek financial counselling if you can, and I think the government should make that more available. But, as a community, we've got to come together. This is a time like a war, where the community has to pull together. If someone in your family's lost their job and you're pretty well resourced, don't wait for them to come to you, because there's often pride and there's shame. Offer to help them, and I think on a community level we can do more. Donate to food banks. Food banks are really running down on resources. These are the kind of things we can be doing to pitch in.
Sam, there was some good news from the Health Minister today, who detailed a lot of measures, in fact, but among them 1.5 million masks and 150,000 testing kits are now in Australia, with a lot more to come. What difference will that make?
This will make a big difference, actually. You know, the extra tests are going to enable us to get a bit more information about what the virus is doing and how it's being transmitted and how it's spread. But most importantly, for those on the front line, the health workers, it's going to give them access to being tested to understand a lot earlier if they're safe, if they're clear, and if they can get back to looking after everybody else. The extra masks, once again, are going to protect those people on the front line, but also perhaps for those families who are in isolation, who are at higher risk, that just can't keep away from everybody. Those masks are going to help them reduce their risk of passing it on.
Some really great advice there, Sam and Kim. Thank you. I think the whole notion of looking out for one another now stands more than ever, doesn't it? We really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, rising concerns for our teachers and students. We speak with one educator who says the health of thousands is at risk due to some schools remaining open.
A newborn baby, no work and mounting bills. The devastating effect the coronavirus is having on so many Australian families. We meet just one of them and speak with the boss of Centrelink.
And Bluetooth used to detect nearby infections and health check booths across some cities. We look at the measures other countries are using to control the spread of COVID-19. And we ask the question, should similar be introduced here? That's all next on the latest from 7 News. Back in a minute. Victoria Police are undertaking random spot checks to ensure Australians who've travelled are abiding by the mandatory 14-day isolation rule in an attempt to slow the spread. Across the globe, countries have quickly turned to innovative technologies and techniques to battle the pandemic. Let's take a look at just a few of them. Now, I'm joined by infectious diseases physician, Dr. Sanjaya Senanayake. Sanjaya, great to see you again. Thanks for joining the latest. Now, China, let's talk about that first. How has China been utilising technology during the pandemic?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, they've been quite innovative. They've been taking drones, for instance, and particularly in areas that have been locked down like Hubei province, etc., and delivering medical supplies via drone, which is really clever and innovative. Then also they use in the catering industry robots. I don't know how sophisticated these robots are, but they have also transitioned them from the catering industry to the medical industry, where they've been able to deliver products and supplies to sterile areas and to even disinfect certain things and even do some diagnostic procedures, apparently. Then finally, they've also had this quite interesting facial recognition technology, which can be used in underground subways or schools. So it can not only look at facial recognition, even through a mask, apparently, but it can even check temperatures.
It's all fascinating. But South Korea and Japan, I'm intrigued by what they've been using. What have they done to help the testing?
Well, South Korea it was very well prepared for this outbreak because they had a bad epidemic of MERS, another coronavirus infection, a few years ago, and they even had a coronavirus exercise in December 2019. And they knew that testing was key, and by the time they only reached double figures in terms of cases, their factories were already producing 100,000 kits per year. And they were very innovative. They created 600 walk-in centres, which looked like telephone booths where they were testing people in a very efficient way. And they had 50 drive-through centres where people didn't have to get out of cars and they were testing them. And in Japan, for instance, they've been using certain other tests, for example, antibody tests, which are rapid tests which take about 10 minutes, where you can detect two types of antibodies, one which is for an acute infection and one which tells you you've had the infection in the past. And in fact, in the FDA in the US, they've approved another type of rapid test for a nasal swab, which we will get in Australia fairly soon, which only takes 45 minutes to test.
It's all really encouraging, and there's a lot to learn from all those countries, and it's getting here fast too, which is the good news. Finally, though, well, at Singapore and its Bluetooth technology, tell me about that. That was very interesting.
Yes, so Singapore has an app, it's called Trace Together. It was developed by the Ministry of Health in collaboration with some others in Singapore. And what it works, or how it works, is through Bluetooth. So every time someone goes with their phone and meets up with someone else who's carrying their phone, a connection is made and recorded in that person's phone. Now, this doesn't go into a cloud or a central database. All these data stay in the mobile phone. And what happens if one of these people becomes a confirmed case of COVID? The health authorities are able to take the phone and analyse the data and see which people this person's been in contact with during the infectious period. And that's a far more efficient and effective way of doing it than me trying to remember who I was talking to 5 days ago.
I know you're a physician, not a technician with Telstra, but do you reckon that's a pretty good plan that Singapore used?
Oh, I think it's a great idea. And in fact, going back to South Korea, they also had regular updates on their mobile phones from the government. So if there was a new case of COVID-19 in your district, your phone would buzz. It would tell you where that person's been. It would tell you their gender, which buses they'd been on, and whether they were wearing a mask or not. So there is much to learn from the technology of our neighbours.
There is indeed. Really fascinating too. Sanjay, thanks for explaining it all again. Good to have you on the show. Now, Mel, in just a moment, it's all fascinating, isn't it? Sanjay is so good at explaining it also. Now, in just a moment, you've got some important information for Australian families.
On schooling. So coming up in just a few moments, as the absentee rates spike, I'll speak with some very experienced educators who will weigh in on school closures and share their essential advice for parents around Australia. That is next on the latest from 7 News. Well, it's a tumultuous time for parents, for students and for teachers as the education system battles unprecedented challenges. Schools across the country are scrambling to transition to online lessons as mums and dads figure out how to manage their child's learning during isolation. Let's bring in educational consultant Dr. Timothy Hawkes in Sydney and Queensland Teachers Union President Kevin Bates in Brisbane. Good evening to both of you. Timothy, starting with you, our children are set to be pulled out of school for weeks, if not months. How seriously will this impact their education long term?
Well, I think long term, Mel, the news is very good. One should never allow the classroom to interfere with education. And I think if this experience is going to teach us anything, it's going to teach us that learning can be done anywhere. It's not something that needs to happen within the four walls of a classroom. The whole of our living space can be a place where we can learn, and that includes the home. And I think the home has some unique things to teach our students. And when interaction between parents and students has been measured as little as 11 seconds a day, go figure, 11 seconds a day, and those same children are spending 2 to 5 hours in front of a screen, I think this could be a wonderful opportunity for parents to recover their role as a primary influence in their children's lives.
Oh my gosh, you've opened up a hornet's nest there. I've got so many questions, but let me ask Kevin, health. I just want to cover off health at the moment because we talked so much, Kevin, about, you know, the concerns of students and health there. But what about the teachers? How are they feeling, particularly with schools still open? Are they worried?
Yeah, Mel, we're certainly hearing very strong messages from our members, teachers and principals in state schools here in Queensland, that for them the key message missing from all of the communication from government has been their health and safety. The employer's legally obligated to make sure they're kept safe and healthy at work, and yet all of the messaging has been about students. And we absolutely appreciate that that's very important, but we can't have one without the other. And so from our perspective, our members are saying to us that they're quite angry that that's missing from the communication, but also quite fearful that they really don't understand what the implications are for them.
Absolutely. Timothy, so you've talked about the fact that parents, it seems to be quite positive from your end on doing this. How practical is it? What do we do with our children every day to make sure they get the best out of learning if they're at home? Do you get them up at the same time? Do they put their uniform on? How do you conduct their day?
Well, Mel, I think routines are important. And I think getting up and having a breakfast, if they don't break their fast, their capacity to learn will be dramatically reduced. They need to get themselves organised, showered and so on. They need to go and get their learning materials there, and of course they need to make sure that they're switched on, logged on, and are ready for the synchronous learning that they're going to be doing with their teacher and indeed with their peers. So there's an organisational element to all of this, which I think in many ways could be very good for our students. They actually have to learn to organise themselves. But I think also it can be tremendous for the students to be seen very much as partners with their parents and with their teachers. It's like a three-legged educational stool. This partnership, I think, could be made to work wonderfully well. This is not to say that parents need to do the work for their students, or that they need to actually be a guide and a resource and an encouragement to come in with the appropriate mug of hot chocolate when it's needed. But I think this could be a wonderful partnership, and I think that schools will never be the same again. I think we'll find a lot more online learning in the world from here on in.
But can I ask, you're painting the picture of the perfect student, someone that's probably self-motivated and mum and dad are home, or one of them are, and it all sounds like a lovely home. What about if, you know, the kids need a little bit more encouragement to sit down and learn? What if, like me, I checked out about grade 7 in maths for my kids and wasn't able to help them with their homework beyond about there? I mean, you make it sound like a beautiful utopia, but let's be honest, there's a lot of challenges that are going to be really hard.
Well, I don't want to underestimate either the wonderful educators like Kevin and those teachers up there in Queensland. They have a tremendous capacity to be able to captivate the attention of their students. They will need to be trained, that's certainly true, between now and when they do deliver distance education. They will need to be trained and skilled up in the various pedagogical tricks that are there, which makes online learning particularly effective. And yes, there is nothing different to what the teacher has to do online to what a teacher has to do in the classroom. They already have to deal with those difficult students, Mel. And we haven't got to go to water by virtue of the fact that it's now going to be virtual rather than face-to-face. I am not going to be underestimating the skill sets of the Australian teacher. They are extraordinary. They've given their life to the learning of these skills, and I reckon they'll make it work.
Absolutely. But Kevin, teachers do a lot. I feel like every year we give them more and more. How will they manage with these extra pressures? How confident are you in the systems working?
I think what's critical here, Mel, is that privilege is at play in the sorts of circumstances that have been described. There are whole communities in Queensland that don't have basic internet access. There's whole communities in Queensland and indeed the rest of Australia where students don't have access to a device at home. So we need to keep a respectful balance around this issue. And from our perspective, unfortunately, the sort of learning that would be involved to ensure that our students are still a part of their learning process clearly is calling on teachers to do much more than they are currently. And from our perspective, that presents a very real challenge. And we'd certainly like to see some more reasonable approach to resourcing and to the access that our teachers and principals might have in setting up the learning that students might undertake into the future.
Kevin, can I ask you one more super quick? Year 12 students, that's a worry, obviously preparing for their final exams. How badly will this impact them? How do they manage?
This is one of those cases where I'd certainly support the notion of thinking outside the square. You know, if at the end of the year we have to generate a student result based on diminished results because students have not been able to complete all the assessment items, then I view that as a so be it moment. You accept whatever the students have done, you calculate an outcome for them, and our universities will be knocking people over in the rush to get enrolments for students in a particular subject area. So we shouldn't have a limited view about what people in the community are expecting from us, and our view would be obviously that there's significant expectations already embodied in the way education is being provided, and those are probably sufficient in the circumstances.
All right, look, I just hope they're all okay and not anxious. Thank you both very much for your time tonight, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And Michael, a bit of advice now for job seekers.
That's going to be important, isn't it? It has never been a busier time for job services. With those queues that we've been seeing stretching around the block, we'll be joined live by the boss of Centrelink. Some important questions there. And a newborn, no work, will meet two of the many young parents hit hard by this health crisis. It's all coming up next, here on the latest from 7 News. As we've seen for the second day in a row, Centrelink offices were inundated with people out of work, queues stretching around the blocks. And tonight, that's the focus of our segment, the COVID Diaries. And senior reporter Denham Hitchcock has been looking at this all day. Denham, the fallout is simply huge.
Michael, it really is. And as always, the numbers here are frightening. We currently have an unemployment rate of 5.1%. That's expected to quickly shoot to 10%. And some economists are warning it could go as high as 20%. But that's the numbers. In this segment, we are seeing how it affects real people. So today, we'll meet a young family in Melbourne, instantly unemployed.
Hi, I'm Jeremy, and this is my wife, Andrea. And this is our baby boy, Skylar, who was born just 2 weeks ago. Born in a world that looks very different today. I'm a freelance travel writer and photographer who has lost all of my income overnight. We know that a lot of people are doing it far worse than we are, people struggling to put food on the table, but we can't help but think about both of our incomes disappearing overnight.
And I'm Andrea. I'm the director of a female strength and conditioning gym in Preston called 23W. Up until yesterday, we had a thriving business that taught women how to lift weights properly and how to feel strong and empowered. Unfortunately, the forced lockdown has meant that we had to close pretty suddenly.
From our lounge room to yours, we know there's a lot of people out there doing it tough, but we're all in this together.
They are now trying to do those gym workouts online, but Mel, 88,000 people lost their job in one day yesterday. 88,000. That safety net is going to be tested.
Absolutely. Those numbers are enormous, Denham. Thank you. And up to 2 million Australians could find themselves unemployed in the coming months as the coronavirus cripples our economy.
So let's go to Services Australia General Manager Hank Jongen now. Hank, thanks for joining the latest this evening. Let me ask you, we've seen in the news all afternoon the lines right around Centrelink offices over the past 2 days. They're like nothing we've ever seen before. The online portal crashed again today. Was the demand on services just simply underestimated?
Look, I think we're like most other organisations where, in fact, we are able to deal with normal capacity and, in fact, generally quite big increases in capacity, but no one could see what was coming in this instance. Having said that, what we are doing is we've increased our online capacity. We can now deal with something like 100,000 simultaneous users at any one time. We've also mobilised staff across the country to ensure that we are dealing with the calls as efficiently as we can. We're training additional staff, we're about to recruit additional staff, and we've increased the operational hours for our call centre. But this is unprecedented, there's no getting away from it. But can I also say that part of the issue is a lot of people are trying to contact us that don't need to. What we're finding is a lot of people who are currently receiving Centrelink payments are clogging up the system because they're contacting us to find out about the stimulus payments, the 2 stimulus payments, and the additional supplement that will be going to job seeker payment recipients. They don't need to contact us. They don't need to do anything. We will automatically assess those payments, and the first stimulus payment of $750 will be rolling out from the 31st of March through to the 17th of April.
You can understand, though, why, Hank, they've been contacting you. I mean, it's good to clarify that now, but clearly people are confused, they're desperate. Can you just run through who is eligible too? Because there has been a few different changes, hasn't there, made?
Yeah, sure. Look, before I do that, though, there is one really important message. You know, the reality of people queuing up and their stories you've just presented. But people don't need to come into our office. what we're saying is that for people that have never dealt with us before, you simply have to ring us on 132 850. There is no need to come into our offices, and there's no need to put yourself at risk and our staff at risk by queuing up and attending our offices.
Yeah, but Hank, let me just butt in here for a minute if you don't mind, because that all sounds fine in theory, but in practice, the majority of people we spoke to today who've been queuing up have gone and queued up because they couldn't get through on the phone, and there was huge confusion about whether ID could be accepted online. A lot of people couldn't do it when they were either trying to register or confirm, so they thought they had to go to the offices to get their ID, and quite often when they got to the front of the queues, a lot of people have said today that we can't help you, go back and get online, and they're frustrated. They're saying we can't get online.
Yes, and what what I have to say is, I've just reinforced that point about unprecedented demand. We're asking people to be persistent and patient and understand that we're doing everything we can to improve our call centre response rates. As I said, we're putting on extra staff, we've extended the hours, but really it's your best option to persist and try and deal with us over the phone.
But you'd understand if you'd lost your job today, your entire income, you're going to do whatever you can to try and sort it out today, and that's why people are queuing. It's a fair human reaction.
I understand that, but look, what I'm saying is you're putting yourself at risk. The queues did look worse than they were because, of course, we're having to only allow certain numbers into our offices, and that's to protect our staff as well as people that are coming to us for their services. But look, what I'm saying to you is be persistent, be patient, because we are doing everything we can to deal with this demand.
All right, Hank, we'll put all our details on our social media too. As much information out there as possible to try and clarify. But Hank Jongen, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.
And for those of you who might be without work now, there is some hope out there. As you just heard, Centrelink will be hiring. And right now there is an increased demand for nurses, supermarket workers and cleaners. Coles alone is looking for 5,000 new staff members. Telstra is hiring 1,000 new call centre employees, and mining giant BHP has 1,500 temporary positions available for truck drivers, for mechanics, for electricians, cleaners and boilermakers. Those numbers don't add up to those that without jobs, but it is certainly a start.
It is indeed. Yeah. All right, well, thank you for that. Well, stay with us. Your Wednesday weather forecast is next here on The Latest from 7 News. Welcome back. There's a live shot. We can't travel anymore, so we'll take you from your lounge room around the world in our weather shots. There's Rome's iconic Trevi Fountain. Usually jam-packed with tourists. Today, completely empty. Let's have a look at some of the temperatures around the country now. Brisbane, top of 27. Melbourne, 18 and cloudy. Sunshine in Adelaide.
And in other parts of the country, Narrabri, a few showers, a top of 23. Berrima, 33 degrees. And Karratha, sunny and 39.
Yeah, Mel, just before we go, obviously there's two thoughts here tonight. It's obviously with everyone suffering. We know that this health crisis is terrible and that people are being infected, ending up in hospital, and those rates are going to increase. But these jobless figures now are going to cause a problem all of their own.
It's almost like these two tsunamis and the fronts are coming, which are frightening. And hopefully some of that information also earlier tonight helped you. I think there's a lot of anxiety and fear.
And we'll keep covering it too to try and help you on the job front as well.
Absolutely. Now, thank you for your company this evening. 7 News will be back with more developments, and we're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister this evening, and we will have a special bulletin for you at 9:30.
For right now, though, from the team here at 7 News, that is The Latest. I'm Michael Usher.
And I'm Melissa Doyle. Good night.